do whatever we want to do. But the first things first is like, when it comes to like energy balance and like the hierarchy of needs, and then macros, micros, all those things, blood sugar stability comes first. I think that it's important. Your physique is your calling card, but I think that we have such a distorted image of what it actually means to have a great physique based on social media, based on CGI, based on all of these movie stars. That just got progressively worse, where like I would then get stabbing pains in my abdominal wall, and like, you can put all the fuel in you in your world, if you can't absorb it in, it's not going to do anything. What is hard is, but I'm in great shape. Why do you do anything? Yes, you are in great shape, but to really truly understand and empathize what your client's going through, you need to push to a level that you are not at currently.
So Jay, I was saying before on air, like, coming up with a question for this was really, really interesting, because there are so many talking points that you have discussed over your time, whether it's social media, we've discussed in private, things about like your story from gut health to diabetes to carnivore diet. Like, this can go a million ways. But just as an overview for people who might not know who you are, tell us who Jay Horley is.
Wow, great question. Something made me think straight off the bat. So, I guess people often define themselves by what they do as opposed to who they are, which is a very interesting point. So I guess what I do is, my profession is training personal trainers to be personal trainers. I think I'm about 50 full-time trainers in now. I work for ATP Personal Training, and I'm based in Singapore, but we have a studio in Hong Kong and Singapore. So that's kind of what I do as a job. But who I am is a type 1 diabetic who practices a primal diet, does way too much jiu-jitsu for someone with as many working hours as I have, has a passion of mobility, resistance training. I'm a bit of a narcissist when it comes to body composition as well. I love playing a bit of anime and reading Stoicism. So that's kind of me in a quick nutshell.
As I said, a lot to unpack with just that in itself, right? And I think there's an interesting parallel here with your profession, basically helping personal trainers be better personal trainers. I'm the same, so there's going to be a lot of very similar and differing opinions coming from this. But I want to delve into like the diabetic side of things first, because I think that has a lot about like, forging the kind of character you are. Because, well, am I right in saying you were told you were type 1 diabetic at the age of 14?
Yes.
I mean, like, that is a years when you're supposed to be carefree, spontaneous, and then you're sort of given this news that you have to plan the rest of your life, what you eat, what you do, how much stress you have. They're just this big bombshell. Like, how did it feel at the age of 14 being told you had type 1 diabetes?
So, I knew it was coming. It wasn't a surprise to me, and I'd been like toying with the idea, because my grandfather and my younger brother both had diabetes. So I did a couple of tests on the down low, because things weren't going right for me. And then I had some really high blood sugar, but I was embarrassed, and I didn't want it to be true. Like a 14-year-old kid, you didn't want it to be true. So I just disguised it from everyone. Like I didn't tell anyone, like, and just went about my business. And then I was at my grandmother's house, and we were all sat down, and she was like, "Oh, let's all test our blood sugar together," because she knew she'd cut on.
It's always the grandmothers, isn't it?
Always the grandmothers. And then we tested, and my blood sugar was high. It was like 30 millimoles per liter, which for anyone that doesn't realize, that's like 5 or 6 times the amount of blood sugar you want inside your blood at any one time. Straight to hospital. Was there for a few hours, came out with all of this medication. And it's kind of just like, I was talking to my partner yesterday afternoon, actually. I was like, I can't believe that was 19 years ago. That memory, that day was like burnt into my brain. So I guess from then, it's just been paradigm shifting. There's been times where I've been anally controlled diabetic, and there was times that I resisted against it, especially in university, where I just didn't have my finger on the ball, which consequently led to a bunch of poor negative health outcomes, which I've written about. But yeah, every day, every meal is a maths equation. It's quite fortunate that I like maths, but there's no thing that you eat that you don't go, okay, this is X amount of medication, or when did I inject last, or when am I going to inject now? Every day is, you wake up and you like plan, I'm going to eat here, here, and here. So that's just being life. So I know that's not what people like in general. That's not what they sign up for, especially when they get into health and fitness. But for me, that's my reality. Am I always perfect with it? No. Do I have days where I just surf it and just see what I can do? Yeah, of course. But in general, majority of the days are I'm going to eat here, here, and here, and I already know exactly what I'm going to eat.
Mm. So you mentioned like you kind of felt like you knew because things weren't going right. But what were the symptoms that you were feeling that made you think, okay, something's not right here?
So the first that comes to mind is excessive thirst. You cannot stop downing fluids, and that's because whether you have type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes, if your body can't clear your blood glucose, it tries to pee it out essentially, right? So it's just like crazy excessive thirst followed by just constant going to the toilet, like taking a pee. So it's just you're just passing fluid. You lose a lot of weight, and then fatigue. And those are the three biggest signs early on for type 1 diabetics.
Was it almost a night and day change when you started like taking medication, started taking your insulin, that you just felt, oh my God, I feel better? Or did it take some time?
No, it is a night and day. Like I can recreate, if I wanted to now, I could just go and take half a jar of honey and recreate that exact same thing that I went through, just let my blood glucose rise and just sit there and wait. And if I correct it, I'll feel better. Obviously, when it goes out of target now, I feel awful. And then you correct, you get your blood glucose back in the range. It's all good again. Apart from the dehydration that went with that, it is night and day. Like a couple of days later, the day after, and you get your blood sugar in range and it's all good.
What was the sort of process of trial and error like? Because obviously you got this, you weren't the personal trainer of trainers that you are now, knowing all this about recovery and nutrition and everything else. What was the trial and error process like of learning, like what can eat, what can't eat? Like what were some of the mistakes you made? Like how did this evolve to what you do today?
So it's been a really long journey, and there's some really simple rules that I wish that they taught me when I got diabetes, So the advice they gave me when I first was diagnosed was, it's okay, you can have a normal life like all the other kids, And I'm sure that would be reassuring for some people. But for me, I know that's not true. Like it's okay, this has happened. It's going to be difficult. But if you get on top of it, you can live a normal and healthy life like everyone else, which is a much different reframe. It's not like, hey, you can eat ice cream, we'll just give you some extra medication for it. It should be, listen, if you're structured with your eating and you manage your diabetes, you can achieve all of the athletic pursuits that you want to achieve. So trial and error was basically, I would take my meal plan or what I'd eat in a food diary in to see a doctor once every couple of months, 2-3 months, so that the feedback loop was very, very long in the beginning because I knew nothing about nutrition. And honestly, I knew nothing about nutrition until I started trying to compete in weight class sports. And then I had to realize that was the first time in my life where I was like, okay, well, I got to lose some weight. So how am I going to lose some weight? And then, well, I've got to learn. I spoke to a personal trainer, and then they were like, hey, you got to start doing this. And then I started structuring my meals and working out the medications to fit between these two things and changing my medications, because I went to the hospital and they're like, oh, athletes prefer this kind of medication because it gives them more flexibility. Oh, well, I wish you told me that like 10. Anyway, not to blame on these guys, but and then the more I got into industry and the more research I started doing, and the power of the internet, which is incredible, I started picking at the brains, and now I write my own medication strategies using my own insulins that not that I create, but I just go and buy different ones. Unfortunately, I'm in the position to do that. But even now with trial and error, so let's say, and we're going to get into my diet in the future, but any changes I make to my diet, I have to implement the change and then just see how that affects my blood glucose over time, and then tweak it again. And that even happens now. If I'm in a calorie surplus, I've got to change it. If I'm in a calorie deficit, I've got to change it. If I'm in a maintenance phase, I have to change it. So there's no one thing that I can just rest on all the time. I've got it quite narrowed down, but it's continually changing with the demands of just what you're going through.
what you said there about the initial doctor's advice would be able to live a normal life and just adjust the insulin accordingly really quite resonated to me. With obviously, I don't have the experience you have living with it personally, but I've worked with a number of people with type 1 diabetes. And I remember I worked with a girl a number of years ago now who lost a tremendous amount of weight, but she came in with that strategy of, right, if I go on a big night out, I just do more insulin, which is a really dangerous maths game to play when you don't know about nutrition and you don't know really how to adjust this. You're kind of winging it based on how you feel and hope you don't mess it up. I mean, like, what would you say to somebody now? And I'm sure you've had people that come to you with type 1 diabetes because, you know, I can imagine if ATP gets that client, it's probably going to go in front of you if you've got the availability. Like, what advice would you give to someone now if they just embarked on this and had no idea of where to start?
So this has happened to me a few times, actually. I've had a type 1 diabetic come in, and we're difficult people. Like, we're so stubborn. It's like, oh, just you know, I just seems to be like, it's one of those things you don't really want to open up and share. Maybe it's a pain point. I don't really talk about it that much either. But what I would advise, and this is what I advise to a lot of people in general anyway, but with diabetics is you have to find a day that works for you. You know, you have to find a breakfast, lunch, and dinner that you're comfortable eating, that meets your goals, and that keeps your blood sugar in range. And then we can add a second breakfast. Then we can add a second rotation for lunch. And then we can do whatever we want to do. But the first things first is, like, when it comes to like energy balance and like the hierarchy of needs and then macros, micros, all those things, no, blood sugar stability comes first. You know, so that's where we need to look at. So we need to find a system of eating that works for you, that keeps you on an average of your 5 millimoles per liter, or just keeping that consistent. And then we can go, okay, cool. Let's make sure that we've got calories in the right place. Let's show we've got equal amounts of protein. And then we can go, okay, so you've got a breakfast with 4 eggs and this, maybe we can add salmon or egg beef or whatever. But it really does start small and then building out, because you can't, there's no magic formula, you know, like beef has got a different digestion profile than chicken. Chicken's got a different digestion profile than eggs. And there's no cracking the code. You know, you just need to go on a Monday or whatever day, on a typical weekday, when I eat at 7 a.m., I eat this meal, it costs me 3 units of medication under normal circumstances. Okay, cool. We're checking that in. That's going inside your book of locked in stuff. Once we've got that consistent, then we can add something else. We know that this equals this. Yeah. And that's how you have to play it in going forward, and always be prepared to tweak if you need to.
Is there an element of denial when someone comes in with, because you're quite health first, right? It's what you do. You've invested your life into it. Do you feel that someone comes in like they want to have their ice cube, they want to have their life that they had before, and they're sort of almost fighting this structure because it's like they've almost had that, with that diagnosis, their spontaneity has almost been robbed from them? Or do you find because they've had a health scare from the doctor, it's a little bit easier because they're forced into that position where your regular client losing a little bit of weight, if they go off plan and they have a bit of freedom, it doesn't make as much of a difference?
No, totally. There's both. And I've been through that denial phase myself as well. Like I remember at like 17 having like a pizza eating contest with my dad or something, you know. It's just like, oh, I'll just inject more. It's okay. I'll just inject more. Like, you know, like, my evolution has been because of studying nutrition, and ignorance is bliss. You know, like I was alive during those years that I wasn't studying nutrition, and, you know, happiness is a relative equation. Like the more you know, actually, the more there is to stress you out about things. You know what I mean? Like compared to when I was 21, 22, I can't do a pizza and a beer the same way, or I wouldn't do it now anyway, but it wouldn't have the same effect on me because you know too much kind of stuff, you know? So there are a lot of people, and I wouldn't say in denial, but maybe my life isn't for them. And I'm very careful of, even with people that are healthy, that don't have diabetes, that are in my life, that I don't want to force or put my lifestyle on them. If they want help, if they want me to put them in the right direction, so be it. But, you know, like there's a lot of hedonistic pleasure to eating, and the socialness and spending time with friends and the celebrations and all of these things. And I know these are absolutely wonderful. And to take that away from someone, there has to be a significant trade-off. And for me, health is and athletic performance and longevity are worth that trade-off, but it might not be worth that trade-off for everyone else. And I completely understand that.
I completely agree with you when you spoke about the more you learn, the more there is to stress you out.
Yeah.
I don't get that so much about nutrition, but for me, my struggles have always been mobility and issues with thoracic spine and deep hip sockets and long femurs. And I remember a time when I just came into the gym and lifted, and it was fun. And I just squatted because squatting was the right thing to do, and I didn't even know what was bad. Whereas now I feel every little thing, every shift, every bit of pain, every niggle, and I can think about it. And I tell you what, in some ways, as much as I love what I've learned over the last 12, 13 years, part of me does sometimes think, God, I miss just training when I didn't give a shit.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Like you just sprint or just do something. And, I do a lot of mobility training for that freedom, but I wouldn't just go straight into the gym and have a squat off with my friends. I'm not just going to go rep max out my squat. No, my knee will be feeling that for a week.
You mentioned there in that, if you have this meal under normal circumstances.
Yeah.
Now, for obviously, some people might understand what you mean by under normal circumstances, but we know that nutrition isn't the only thing that affects our blood sugar. There is stress, there is training, there was things like this. How did that process go? One, from a stress thing, because I know you work very, very, very hard. And if you got things in place to manage your stress and recovery? And how did your training develop? Because I know you've gone through periods of training very hard and then training less to focus more on your sports side of things and lifting less frequently. How has that process gone from managing a blood sugar perspective with all these variables?
So, yes, so much to unpack in there. So an easy one is if you have a poor night's sleep, I need to take more medication, in the morning because I'll have insulin resistance. And that's one of the biggest things. An example, people never realize this because they've got normal physiology, but I had low blood sugar this one time. I was in Repulse Bay. I think I was in Repulse Bay. And I was walking into that 7-Eleven that used to be next to that Pizza Hut or wherever down Repulse Bay by the one. And I just got really pissed off about something. And I don't know what it was. I was just I had low blood sugar. Something really pissed me off, and I was kind of just fuck, in this kind of little rage. And my blood sugar came up. That stress released enough glucose to save my butt at that time. And I was like, oh, win. I don't need to eat anything to correct. My blood sugar is now, I feel okay now. My blood sugar is normal. So, there's let's say you go in and do a monster leg session. That's going to raise your blood glucose. So you're going to need to anticipate that and inject for that. So there's any type of situation that stress isn't. We don't say stress is good or stress isn't bad. Stress is necessary, but it's just something you have to be aware of with the diabetic. That any time that you have acute stress, it's going to spike up your blood sugar. Anytime you're under chronic stress, it's going to mean that you're going to need more medication over that period of time of chronic stress.
Just thinking out loud here, just from a perspective, a lot of coaches are going to listen to this because that's most of my following, and I presume most of your following now as well. From coaches that have clients with diabetes, you mentioned, I don't need to eat anything to correct my blood sugar levels when they have a little bit of a drop. Have you ever used, with yourself or anyone else who's been struggling with this, training to, instead of extra calories, to have someone that has a bit of a low? Is that something ever with GLUT4 helping glucose get into the cell and to release some blood sugar when they have a bit of a low?
Yeah, so this is the I was having this chat with a diabetic recently. Actually, this is a risky game to play, because when I've spoken to some people and their blood sugar goes low, they have effectively done some short sprints and managed to raise their blood glucose. Perfectly fine. That's great. But as we know, you need to get above your lactate threshold to release blood glucose. You need to be in glycolysis, essentially, right? So it's hey, I'm going low. Should I expend a lot of energy and not release any glucose because of whatever reason and go even lower? Or do I give it a go and try? So for me, it's not something that I've experimented with when you can take 5 grams of honey and be okay. But yeah, I know people that have done that successfully, 100%.
it's a balancing act as well, right? Because surely if the intensity goes too high, you create a level of oxidative stress that's going to have the opposite effect.
Yeah, well, you also, if you, that's one thing, if you have circulating blood glucose, or you've depleted your liver glycogen or whatever, like you're just going to burn it up, and you're going to have even less glucose, or if you're using a muscle group and that blood glucose gets driven into whatever muscle cell you're using it, that's going to drop blood glucose as well. So yeah, it really is always a balancing act. So what I like personally, and which works for a lot of us, is just no circulating insulin in your system when you train. So that never goes well. So I like to train at the end of an eating window. So let's say I'm eating every 3 times a day, every 5 hours or something, every 5 or 6 hours, So I'll eat, digest it, have rested for a while, that insulin would have cleared from my system, and then I'll train. And then I'll eat again post-workout, obviously with the benefit of GLUT4 receptor and insulin sensitivity. And I find that works much better for me. Some people like to have pre-workout snacks, but I don't, like, just because of that issue.
Yeah, I can imagine it's one of the things. It's like, if I can imagine with diabetes, if in doubt, go for the simple option. Stuff that works, stuff that you can keep consistent, stuff that it doesn't become a maths game that it's hard to play, because you can kind of control to a degree. I know this amount of honey is going to sort me out, but with training, it's a bit of a lottery. I don't know, that same 3 sprints might have a completely different effect one day to the next, right? Yeah,
and then if you're used to it, you do you. That's great. It's just whatever you're used to. And I'll admit, it is really easy to overcorrect. Some of the most painful self-inflicted pain of my existence is when I go and I'm 2 tablespoons of honey in, and I'm like, oh, okay. Then my next thing, my blood glucose is like 9. And I'm like, okay, I got to inject. And then I'll overcorrect again. And I'm just like, that.
A roller coaster.
Yeah, that's a roller coaster.
So with regards to your training itself, you've done more, you've done less. Is this more geared towards because your priority now isn't bodybuilding like it used to be, or has the number of days you train been developed by how well it works with your blood sugar and your life and your energy and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so that's 2-factor. I like to train a lot. I just one of those people. Some people are minimalistic with their training, and that's cool. And I think maybe this is, I started training when I was 5, and I've been doing it a lot, and it does really manage my blood glucose. I think I get a lot of energy when I don't train. So I'm perpetually probably overtrained. And then some days I don't train, or train once, and I'm like, oh, there's so much more to life than training. But then I forget about it, and I go back to training. So, yeah, so I like to train a lot. I think that I don't do loads and loads of resistance training anymore, because I like skill development. I always have. I like playing sports. I like playing skills. I like achievements. If I'm playing an Xbox game, there's that dopamine cycle, that dopamine reward for achieving things, and the dopamine loop for me for, oh, hey, I took my bench press from 80 to 81 or 80 to 82, just doesn't get me off, so that's cool. I train because I like to do resistance training. It's important for my body. It's my profession. So I always like to have skin in the game. But for me, if I could just lift heavy a little bit, not too much volume, and then go and practice choking someone out or being choked out, that's a much better trade-off for me, because for some reason it just takes me to, you can train really, really hard to your limits, and that's in resistance training. And I understand people do that, but there's something when I was running 400 meters, and you're pushing yourself to the absolute limit of what your comfort levels, or you're training really hard back-to-back rounds in jiu-jitsu, or even the skill developments of doing some, trying to gain the splits or doing some bodyweight stuff, that appeals to me. And I had this for so many years, working with these massive people, huge amount of muscles. I'm not a small guy myself, but I'm not a bodybuilder. I work with bodybuilders now, and I would get FOMO. Oh, these guys are so big, these guys are so jacked, and I'd want to, and I would train, because, to be accepted by the tribe, accepted by the community, because it's what was supposed to be done. But last week I put in 12, 13 training sessions, and 7 of them were jiu-jitsu, and 2 or 3 of them were lifting, and 2 or 3 of them were like mobility training, so that's cool. That's cool for me. If I can lift 2-3 times a week and do mobility, probably a little bit more than that, and then the rest of it's jiu-jitsu, I'm in a happy place. Will I do this forever? Absolutely not. Like, I feel like the busier I am in work, the more I need to train as a coping mechanism for that, because it's like a safe space. And people are like, that's not the answer from a physiological stress point of view. Yeah, I know. Don't tell me. I study stress. I know that's the answer. Like, I would love to go. If I was back in the UK, I didn't train that much. I went for a walk in the woods. I read some books. When I was in Thailand, I'm just walking on the beach drinking coffee every day. But when you're in a, like for me, when I'm working really hard, I'm in the computer. I'm doing a lot of writing work. I'm mentoring. I'm coaching. Like, the thing about jiu-jitsu for me and 400 meters and stuff is that I can't think about anything else. When someone's trying to technically kill you, there's no time to think about what's going on later or what's going on tomorrow or managing your diabetes or all these things. Like, you have to be present. And I'm a really big junkie for things that make me present.
I couldn't agree with you more with that. I was diagnosed this year with ADHD, and it's something that I know that I've had this since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that no one even pays attention to, right? It's just, he procrastinates, or he doesn't live up to his potential, or he can't focus. And for me now, like, I'm now looking at what can I do from a training perspective, that through my 20s, bodybuilding was sort of my life. And like you, that I'm not a small guy, but I worked in the land of giants, and having that sort of FOMO. And now it's like, okay, what's going to make me present? And looking at little things like, have you ever listened to Chris Williamson in Modern Wisdom podcast? He talks about the menopause. Everyone's a bodybuilder in the 20s, and everyone does jiu-jitsu in the 30s. And I'm sort of looking at that period of my life now, my early 30s, and go, right, what is my next step? Is it doing something like that? Actually doing a little bit of yoga. I'm not a big yoga fan, but that executive function of doing something that makes me present and allows me to focus will mean that my brain can stop just for a short enough period of time to come back to work with a fresh head and actually be better at it.
Yeah.
So, like, a couple of things I want to unpack in what you said. The first thing was that training to kind of work with these big guys and these giants. There's going to be a lot of trainers listening to this that work in gyms with people that are bigger than them, right? The day you start lifting is the day you're forever small. How did you get over that? Because it sounds like you have gotten over that.
Yeah, I've gotten over that, and there's so much to unpack in that. It's like, one, like the basic principle is you can't compare yourself to someone else, and we all do. It's impossible not to. I'm reading Stoicism all the time, and there's a lesson like, you can't compare yourself. You wouldn't trade lives with people. But it's how we get all of our self-validation, especially on social media. So the biggest thing is, and I've worked with a lot of coaches, and I've worked with someone in particular that was very important in my development as a man and all these things. And you have to do self-worth exercises. Like, you have to find your own self-worth and self-value, and this comes as slightly as an off tangent, but it was part of the journey, which was, writing down the things you like about yourself, which is number one, like, what do you like? What have you achieved? What are you happy with? And all these sorts of things, and just really going, I'm really proud of myself, what I've achieved and what I've gone through. And then being honest with yourself, like, wow, like, I feel inadequate around these guys, and then you don't know what they're doing, or more importantly, what they're taking. And people can take as much vitamin S as they want. If your goal is bodybuilding and getting massive and all that, I support it. Someone was talking to me about the other day, like, hey, how do I manage my my diabetes with getting on some testosterone replacement therapy and all these sorts of things, and that's perfectly well. And like, how many hours are they committing to that? Like, you can't complain about the results you don't get from the work you didn't do. So it really just takes a level of maturity to understand that I don't want this, and this is okay. And this is not me copying out. Like, people are listening to this and they haven't looked at it, so they're going to be like, I bet this dude's 70 kg. no, I've been the best part of like touching 90 between, like when I'm peak, like absolutely super lean, I'm like 83, 84, which is not small, and I'll push up to 90 when I'm not super lean. So, by no means like a tiny person, but when you're rubbing shoulders with my dad, who's 105, and all my training partners back at the old company that I was working at were 105, 110, 115, it makes me a tiny human being in that company, So just to get back to my point is it's okay to want what you want. I think as a health and fitness professional, you should always maintain a level of physique that is not a walking anatomy chart, but is something that your clients would love to aspire to. Being an inspiration goes a long way. One day when you've got like thousands of testimonials, you can walk around like out of shape and be as cool. Like, just look at my wall of fame. That's completely fine, but you need a resume to back that up if you're not going to look good. So I think that it's important. Your physique is your calling card, but I think that we have such a distorted image of what it actually means to have a great physique based on social media, based on CGI, based on all of these movie stars, that it makes us feel bad about ourselves. And I even get those doubts now, and I on the calipers, I don't remember the last time I was over 10%, but that's not to be humble. That's just to tell you the fake humble. That's to tell you the extent of what it's like to go through these issues in your brain about what is actually how you actually look versus how you perceive yourself. And it does come down to self-value. And that was a long-winded answer. And you have to find the reasons that, that you do like about yourself.
Yeah, you mentioned inspiring there as well. And it's sort of, I think it's reframing what inspiring is to a potential client. Yeah. Like if with us, it's maybe a little bit harder in our niche of sort of working with coaches, that maybe we are dealing with people that are comparing themselves to these 120 kilo guys. Yeah. We're trying to, advertise to a coach on Instagram. We're comparing ourselves to the Jordan Shallows, the hypertrophy coaches, these monsters of the world. But for the average personal trainer out there, it might be your superpower and your advantage if you're in pretty good shape and occasionally has gotten at least once or twice into very good shape for their size, like gotten very, very lean to show you can go further. But you don't need to be a monster. And I think one of the things I learned as well is like, my superpower is that I've done this despite the fact that I've grown up in a family that owned pubs, and I like a beer and I like a pizza. And I'm no different from the person in front of me who's paying me for my training. I just have periods of time in my life where I turn it on, and I have habits that keep me not too far away from that the rest of the time. Whereas that person who's 120 kilos might be inspiring to some, but intimidating to somebody else. And for us, when we work in those places, for us now, we will always think big is that biggest guy in our last gym. Whereas I get people calling me big, and I'm like, what? No, just a tight t-shirt, mate. I can't get my head around that process, because to me, everyone is bigger than me. And now I've moved from that gym, and I come and work for James Campion, who is a monster. Huge. So it's not changing anytime soon, right? But it's as you said, it's knowing that self-worth and knowing that there is power in not being the biggest dude in the room. You don't have to be. And even with coaches, I'm working now with a lot of coaches that are newer to this game. It's like, but how do we make you, one, show that you have done it, and two, a better communicator, have better skill sets. All these other tools that make a great personal trainer that isn't just having this incredible body and Instagram profile.
Yeah, you said some great things in there, and I'll agree, and I'll follow up on a few of them, which is one, you were talking about at some point you've got into shape, so I think that's really important to empathize with what the client's going through, because let's say we've taken on, like, either me or you, we've hired someone and they've come into us and they're in shape and they've been in shape, but they've been at that shape forever. And that's just a product of their lifestyle. It's going to be very hard for them to understand why their client's not in shape, or what their client's going to go through when we ask them to be in a deficit or to change their behaviors, because you've grown up with these behaviors or adopted these, or this is just you. There's been no behavioral change element or working towards a goal element in there. So what is hard is, but I'm in great shape. Why are you doing anything? Yes, you are in great shape, but to really truly understand and empathize what your client's going through, you need to push to a level that you are not at currently, because your clients need to do that as well. So I like clients that have, like new coaches that have come in that are so passionate about the health industry because they've been on a transformation themselves and they know what that's going to go through. There's always the rebound there that, that might blow up afterwards, and then you got to coach them out on that stuff. Whereas someone who comes in straight after being a professional athlete that's always just eaten whatever and just trained really hard, it's a different mindset we have to get them into coaching. So it's a very good point that, people need to have made that change, and that is what really makes you a good coach. Or one of the factors that contributes to being a good coach, I should say. But then, on top of that, there's a standard that you need to hit, and then anything above that it's great, but it's kind of not going to make you better at coaching that client in front of you. And this is not to say don't achieve for it, because if you want to go and do physique stuff, I'm more than supporting it. If you want to, like, I've taken on a lot of physique coaches or people who have physique experience, but there's also, you have to layer that on with communication and admin skills and relates personability. And there's so many other things that we need to go into to make you a better coach outside of just being like an Adonis or Aquaman standing on the beach holding his trident, right? There's loads of other things.
You hit the nail on the head. And when I've looked at the coaches that I've worked with, looked at the coaches I've mentored, if we look at, for use of a better term, the mesomorphs that I've seen work there, they're not often the best coaches because they've come to the point where they've never really had to push hard to look all right. And they're the people that turn out to photoshoot averagely lean because they look good all the time, year round, never ever had to push that hard. And I also find that we look at the bodybuilders and we look at the athletes and you go, they're going to be great. Look at them. They are so inspiring. But they've never understood what it's like to not feel like training or could be so stressed at work that you lose time to train. Or another one with bodybuilders that I often find is, if I told you to eat chicken and broccoli for the next 12 weeks, you'd be like, fine, no problem at all. And they write diet to people like they are going to be like that.
Say
and
no
they
more.
don't understand it. Yeah, exactly. Easy. How many pieces of broccoli do you want, sir? And writing diets like that does not make sense for the average person, right? And as you said earlier on, we'll get onto your dieting approach, that you don't want anyone necessarily, depending on circumstances, obviously, to necessarily diet like you. It's finding that approach that works for them. And that's because you've had to work hard and trial and error certain things that a bodybuilder might only see that one way.
Yeah.
So before we get on to your diet specifically, tell me a little bit about your issues with gut health, because I know you've had some real struggles with this.
Yes. Where to begin? A few years ago. So I've been practicing some sort of a meat-based diet now for over 3 years, maybe 3.5. So we'd have to rewind about 5.5 years ago. And I was in the early stages, just brain fog and bloated all the time. Like headaches, brain fog, that pushed the caffeine intake up as much as I physically possibly could bear to try and clear my brain, and just distended. Like my gut was like distended all the time. When I breathed in, bam, the abs are back. Everything else has just got like this kind of like almost like Liver King looking belly. It was just abs, but really like pushed out like all the time. And it just got progressively worse, where like I would then get stabbing pains in my abdominal wall and I couldn't stand up during training. Coaching clients, I'd be leaning on things, like trying to sort myself out. And then the next thing was I'd have to go home. I just couldn't stand up or function anymore. And then I would get super gassy all the time. And then the pain just got worse and worse.
Were you scared before you found out what was going on, or did you have an inkling because you'd been in the industry for a little while?
I just thought, I thought I had just food allergies, So I was like, oh, okay. So I went and saw a doctor and I got all my IgA and IgGs done, and then they flagged a few things on there, which we know isn't the best science in the world anymore now. But at the time, it was workable, So I pulled some things off, and then I had like symptom relief. And there was this really big push in the industry for everyone to eat as many fruit and vegetables as they can. Like 5 a day is not enough. If you're not eating 11 a day, you're a bad personal trainer. You're like, how can you possibly be healthy? So, I was like in a quest to get my health better. And I think all through this time, I was I was tracking my HRV, just trying to find something to raise my HRV.
For context, what was your HRV like? Was it really low at this period of time because of the issues you were having?
Yeah, my HRV, I like loves being low because I'm perpetually, well, I have an autoimmune condition for one, but two, perpetually overtrained, overworked, and had massive gut issues. So I think I forget which system. At the time I was using that chest strap one and the app. I forget what the app was, but
the HRV probably.
Yeah, super low. Like which I think the scale is like 0 to 100, right? I think we're talking, I don't know, like 20. And I think it's just chronically low all the time. I forget the numbers. Someone would probably correct me. So consequently, now I use Aura Ring, so I've got a much better understanding of the scale. So it just wasn't good. So I went to the doctors, and then this kind of cleared some stuff up for a while. And then I went heavy on the fruit and veg. I was like, oh, like all these plants must be the way to go because like I just need to get healthier. Like I want to be. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. So like I was like, I want to do what I'm going to do. So, and then things just started getting worse and worse and worse for me. So then I went into the doctor, and I'm lying there, and she's like pushing on my stomach, and it's like just even touching my abdominal wall. It's crazy levels of pain. So she was like, oh, I think you've got an intestinal infection, or along the lines. We did some diagnosis. We ran loads of tests, and consequently loads of stool tests. And consequently, I had a really bad intestinal infection and then I had some markers, which are early marker signs for intestinal cancer. So it hadn't progressed there, but this is one of the early flagging tests that they use for people who end up developing intestinal cancer. So long story short, there's some super smart people that can correct me, but the simplistic way to think about what happened was all of the roughage and fiber that I was putting into my digestive system was passing to my large intestine, which was for breeding bacteria. That's what they do. There's a fermentation process. That's how gorillas get all of the energy. They release short-chain fatty acids into the bloodstream. There you go. But if you get this bacterial overgrowth that then travels up to your small intestine, that can then damage your intestinal lining and cause an infection over time. So basically now you have real damaged small intestines. So when you eat things, you don't have the micro brush border enzymes to actually absorb nutrients. So when I did my nutrients, my vitamins and minerals test, I was deficient in 15 vitamins and minerals, even though I was eating like the world's most paleolithic diet. And it makes sense. Like you can put all the fuel in you in your world. If you can't absorb it in, it's not going to do anything. So we tried loads of things off that. The recommendation from the doctors is to try a low FODMAP diet, which is a diet low in food products or foods that are going to ferment. So you're going to kill off all of the bad pathogens that you have, coupled by a load of medication. I had some mixed success on this. I was doing a lot of internet research at the time, just reading. And I came across a couple of people, all at the same time. And I had a few people that were dabbling with it as well. So I was getting like direct friends experience and then the internet telling me that I should try it as well. So I came across a guy called Borje Fagerli, who's a genius, lives in Europe, and Sean Baker at the same time. So I read in October-ish time, I read Borje Fagerli's book and another book that he recommended called The Hyper-Carnivore Diet. And then I got to January and Sean Baker was like, let's do World Carnivore Month like 4 years ago. And I was like, all right, cool. Let's have a go at this. So I jumped in for 30 days. I was like, okay, what am I? This is weird, not eating fruits and vegetables, but I'm going to do this for 30 days. And I didn't eat anything but beef and salt and then a little bit of honey to correct my blood glucose for 11 months straight. Because I just felt everything reversed, and I'm not telling people this is the way to go and get to the elite of human performance. I'm not saying this. For me, that was sick, that went to normal. That's the biggest physiological improvement in performance I've ever had. There's the first picture that you'll see on my social media is my skinny, emaciated, malnutrition self at like mid 70 kg, and then post my first carnivore photo shoot, which consequently I've beat now, but 85 kgs and like lean, so 84 kgs and like lean. So it's like my body was just starving for nutrients all that time. I couldn't absorb nutrients because of my infections or whatever. And yeah, bam. Consequently, I was just, whether it was the best thing for longevity or whatever at that point, it didn't even matter. It was just like, I've finally given my body fuel, and I took that fuel on. And I guess everyone that's a convert is like, I believe in this system now, because this system got me to where I am. Obviously, I've made loads of changes and tried and errored loads of things over the last 3.5 years, which we can go into if you need. But that was my initial response from going to bacterial overgrowth, intestinal infections. I can't get through a week's worth of work, brain fog, bloating, and stabbing abdominal pains, and losing and just being really skinny fat, to what I am now, which is considerably better, in my opinion, anyway.
You're going to get three camps of people that are going to listen to you talk about the carnivore diet, right? You're going to get the people that are going to be like, this is interesting, I might consider this, I might have a look at this. You get the people that are indifferent, don't know anything about it, and then you're going to get the people that are going to like say this is the dumbest idea ever, and you're going to get the zealots here, right? That live at the extreme on the other end. So when you initially went down your wormhole of looking at these people that all came up at once, whenever you go down a wormhole of carnivore, you'll get a number of people that go, it is the most horrendous thing ever. And when you look at like people, and both of them are often going to be very, very intelligent. Look at Sean Baker and the work he's done. You compare that to Rhonda Patrick and the work she's done, and like completely opposite ends of the spectrum of how they think about the carnivore diet. So what was it that appealed to you, or what was the stuff that you read that you went, okay, this is definitely worth giving a go for this month?
It wasn't, it was compounded for me with how I felt. And we can go into the little nuances on what I read now, but it was like, I can't get out of bed in the morning. I had like depression. I would sit in a dark room for long periods of time, being super miserable, to life is wonderful. I can pick my legs up and I'm running around like I'm 10 years, like I'm a 5-year-old kid, So I just remember sitting in this is going deep off the dagger. I remember sitting in a dark room, just like I said, I was making a promise to myself, I don't care, because I had so many joint pains and injuries at the time, and I was like, I don't care what I look like, I don't care what my body composition is. I would sell my soul for whatever it takes. I just want to be able to train pain free, just be able to turn up to training and make it through a pain testing in jiu-jitsu one day, pain free, and I'll trade it for that. And then, I was given something that once I tried it, and then I got that all back and some, so that was the biggest, sell for me. Like, yes, there could be things out there that will also work. It could not be this reason at all. But for me, like N=1, I'm done. I'm out. There you go. I'm N=1. Will I try and optimize? Yes, I have tried to optimize, and I'm still doing that now. So, we just keep on moving the ball. So to answer your original question, to what really stood out for me was, like I studied nutrition. I knew about vitamins and minerals and fat soluble vitamins and micronutrient deficiencies and all these sorts of things. But the biggest thing was when I was reading Borje Fagali's book, it was just like he was talking about his symptoms, and it was if he was reading my symptoms. It was kind of just like, oh, and I had this, and then I had this, and I was like, oh my God, I've got this, and then I was just like man, and then I read, I forget what his name is. I'll read the book. It's one of the best books I ever read on nutrition, called Hypercarnivore Diet, and it's basically summarizes meat and fruit. And he goes back ancestrally and he was a hardcore vegan zealot, and he talked about all of his health conditions, skin conditions, and all of these things, and how he reversed it, and all the things he tried. And just to go back, and he's like, listen, here's a picture of the human digestive system. Here's a picture of a cow's digestive system. They're not the same. Here's a picture of a wolf's digestive system. Looks pretty similar to human digestive system. So people are playing to my science card. Then they're like, okay, then I love ancestral history. Okay, let's go back. Let's say you're in Europe, where we're probably like ancestrally from, like the Great North. What are you going to do in the winter when it's frozen? Oh, eat animals. What are you going to, are you going to be able to get your avocados and your cashew nuts in the north of Scotland during the Ice Age? Probably not. Yeah, you're going to get loads of plants seasonally in the summer. Probably, yeah. Like you're going to dig up some potatoes or whatever you're going to dig up, right? But it's just like 24/7 for people who are from northern parts of the world. You wouldn't have had access to plants all year round. Physically impossible. If you were born on the equator, you had a darker complexion. Maybe so. Maybe you'll do better with a higher carbohydrate diet ancestrally. But he was just like appealing to my ancestral card. I was like, that makes perfect sense. So I was like, science ticked, ancestral ticked. Do I feel better eating this? Ticked. Okay. Like one more evidence do I need to look into.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I remember reading, it's not a carnivore-based book, but it's one of my books I always recommend new coaches go and read because it puts hormones and understanding a little bit about what's sort of behind calories in versus calories out. Like, what are the things that actually affect the calories out part of this equation, right? Because, I think both of us will agree, like, you see a lot of people that may be preaching things like the carnivore diet, and the reasons why maybe a lot of people turn off them and their message, despite being good, is that they almost demonize calories as this isn't the way to get in shape, where we both know that's bollocks. But
absolutely,
the calories out, the things that affect the calories out part of that equation, the amount of calories you were burning when you were absorbing nothing was so low.
Yeah.
So despite eating less, you had to work so much harder to be in a deficit or to even be in an actually efficient surplus to build muscle because you weren't nourished. And that's the thing that some people forget. But this book goes into what I found really interesting is a person's had dental issues all his life. And looking at tribes, and they all have perfect teeth with no toothpaste, no floss, no nothing. And I think that's where that science meets, okay, there's got to be some logic in here because this doesn't make sense from what we are necessarily taught to keep our pearly whites.
Yes.
And that's the thing I was like, okay, for anyone that tells me there is nothing in some of this, there's something. It might be you take a bit of it, but it shouldn't be absolutely dismissed like it often is when you look at some people.
Yeah, someone will go, diet's too high in no vitamin C, too much saturated fat. Don't be silly. Don't even talk to me. And it's like, oh, okay, like like maybe you need so much vitamin C because it's a contributor to how much glucose you absorb. If you're not absorbing that much glucose, you need that much vitamin C. You do need some. Like it's not that I'm saying that you don't, but there's always, like we're always so quick to think we know everything, and one of the biggest things is it's okay not to know things 100%. Like it's okay to change your mind. There's so many different elements. There's so many different elements to it. And you all know from my social media, I'm a very big believer and proponent in it. And I've read and I can have a sensible discussion from every point of view or for every criticism that people want to come up with. But it's just a conversation. We don't have to, like I tell on the record, my dad is a vegan, like we still get on. We still went for a hike together. That's completely fine. He does what he does. I do what I do. We can, if we wanted to, have an argument or a discussion about, but why?
It's just a tool, right?
Yeah.
If all you've got to hammer everything is a nail, and it's for you. You feel better on it, you stick to it, you slowly modify it over time. For somebody who has issues, gut issues, autoimmune issues, it could be an elimination diet that they prefer because they enjoy meat and they don't enjoy veg too much and they want to feel better. And then it's like, right, let's build on top of this. And they might end up 5 years down the line on a high carb diet, but the foundations were laid. And I look back at the time where not so much carnivore dieting, but as you know, I work for a company that's very much fan of the low carb boot camp from Charles Poliquin. And while do I make all my clients have steak and nuts for breakfast from day one now and go on a low carb boot camp? No, because it's a hard sell to change Cocoa Pops to venison within the first day.
Yes.
But what I did like about it is that, one, it just set a structure and a foundation of the absolute basis in place. If someone's diet is overfilled with carbohydrates, going on a low carb approach is a simple way of just going, right, let's get rid of all the stuff that's probably making you feel a bit rubbish, struggling with your blood sugar, struggling with like lethargy, struggling with gut issues. And let's just take it out, and we have to fill it with protein. You're not going to miss your protein target if we haven't got an option. And then it's like, right, let's build the start from the ground up. Let's add some rice here. Let's add some Cocoa Pops if you digest them well post-workout, right? But like, what I go round and round the roundabouts, like, I do think, like, if I had a completely, like, how many times do I run into that Walter kind of client, and they were relatively new to this and they didn't come in with a high carb approach, I would potentially go low carb still to this day, because it just lays the groundwork well.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, I mean, to your point, there's a lot of people in the primal community, they call it now, the carnivore community, that have incorporated significantly more carbs into their diet than they have, and I've gone through phases of it as well. So I think the biggest point that you looked at then was, and I forgetting all of my favorite authors' names at the moment today's, but long story short is that studies are wonderful, right? Like doing the research and all of these people, and they say, on average, this approach works for this population of people. But it's like, okay, so this approach is proven for 60% of the people in this study. The 40% of people weren't responders, but also what was the population and the age and the training and all these sorts of things. So studies are great tools, but they don't really tell you about the person you have in front of you. They can give you things to try, but it's very much that doesn't mean anything. So for me, like, I know that for glycolytic sports, glucose is going to be fun than having no glucose. So I know that for a fact. And I was actually, chatting, like DMing Lane Norton at one point or someone else. And it was like, I was actually doing a lecture on the same thing in work. And it was like, okay, but if your client doesn't have a gallbladder, then a high fat diet's not going to work for them that well. They're going to have little tiny bits of fat where they can manage it with some supplementation. And then for me, who's a type 1 diabetic, yes, you can get to the point where you have a high carbohydrate diet, but it makes things a lot more complicated. So for me, having a low carbohydrate diet is just easier because you're diabetic, because then you don't have, it's like driving an Xbox game versus a real car with the manual. Like, it's so much easier to do. So there's the convenience of nutrition as well, as much as the end product of these things as well. So woulda, coulda, shoulda. We can go around on this in circles, but I was with you. I did the whole Charles Poliquin meat and nuts breakfast, and looking back, I had some great results during that time. And then I went and tried to push a really high carbohydrate approach and didn't have some great results. So I should have just realized maybe high carbs not diets for me. But I tried to force the hammer, and you come round in full circle, and to a point that you made earlier, when people say calories don't matter or calories where you shouldn't be focusing on, I mean, I just don't know how you can make that clarification. Sure, like, I don't count my calories anymore. I don't. But that's because I've got like expert level of understanding of what I'm eating, or like I understand that I'm roughly in my ballpark or my wheelhouse and I can listen to my body for the rest of it. Whereas I've got fat as a carnivore. I've also got incredibly lean as a carnivore. The only difference was the amount of calories I ate.
Exactly. And I think people confuse counting calories and calories not matter. Like, you can not count your calories.
Count calories,
but you still have. I
advise you to do it a little bit, or learn how to do it, or get a rough ballpark, or follow a meal plan. But calories not mattering defies everything since the dawn of time.
There's a thing in there you talk about research. And I kind of want your take on it before I give mine. What do you think of the push for the evidence-based crowd in the fitness industry? There's great people. I'm talking as an overview.
Oh, I read the studies, like, I like learning these things, like Examine sends out their top 5 study summaries for the month, and I like reading them. I used to subscribe to Alan Aragon for a long time. Chris Beardsley is the guy that does the resistance training, right? Like, what wonderful stuff, But I think that people and the social media generation are their first priority is being right or knowing something or trying to find the silver bullet, that it kind of defeats the logic of working hard sometimes. And so I like studies because I'm in education, so I have to put all the references in my work and all of these things. But ancient South Americans realized by trial and error that eating beans and rice together gave you a complete protein source. They didn't need to do an elaborate study for them to tell them, right? Protein comes from the Greek word of proteus, which means, first importance. They knew back then eating protein. Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't know that between 40 and 70 seconds of time under tension was the optimal balance of myofibril and sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. He just trained really hard. So there's a storm in Singapore.
Whoa.
So I'm not against either of them. But this is a slightly thought that could be my own personal bias. I see a lot of evidence-based people that don't look like they train, and I see a lot of non-evidence-based people that really look like they train. And there's going to be the opposite in both spectrums. I'm sure Hypertrophy Coach studies as well. But what I think is often missing is that knowledge is only like 20 or 30% max of what you read, whereas most of the knowledge you gain is from what you actually do. So when someone wants to learn how to diet, you should follow a diet, because you'll learn more about the dieting process by following it than you will about reading about it in a textbook. You have to expose yourself to new information. You have to read about it. But unless you have skin in the game, like I couldn't get better at jiu-jitsu by just watching YouTube videos. I have to go and then practice those techniques. So too many of the evidence-based crowd are just reading and not implementing. And then too many of the bro crowd are just doing and not reading. But I still think that they're getting a little bit further ahead than the guys that are just reading. Then they both need to come together.
Yeah, you share exactly the same opinions on this as I have. And I think just to follow up on those points, like when it comes to, I think the problem with some of the evidence-based crowd, I am not talking about the Eric Helms, the Lane Nortons, the Andy Morgans of this world by any stretch of the imagination, who are excellent. But you get a lot of people now that their whole basis of their knowledge base is based on studies. And the problem is, one, do they know how to read the study properly, which is a big if. But the second thing that I always find is that almost knowledge needs to come before backing your stuff up with studies. Going back to what made you look at going into the carnivore diet, you probably saw a lot of studies for vegans and vegetables and carnivore. It was the fact you sort of knew a little bit about energy pathways and the gut health and digestion and assimilation and, energy systems that made you sort of piece this stuff together and know what studies were useful and what worked for you at that moment in time. You had a system of filtering information, which I don't think we have now. Whereas you see the Game Changers documentary is the perfect example of you can make a study fit whatever you want to. And if you want to go and find confirmation bias, you can be an evidence-based coach and find confirmation bias. And the problem is now people are finding what they want to hear rather than actually looking for truth.
Yes. And as we talked about offline, being in social media, being an echo chamber and being right and all of these things. And I think that we all forget that once upon a time, we all got into this industry to help the person in front of us. And so many of us have got into the industry now or are in the industry now with trying to get likes on social media, and I think one of my coaches asked me today, hey, Carol, how come you don't post on social media? One, I should post way more on social media because I've got a lot of stuff that I want to share, but I'm actually, for the majority of the time, too busy working with real coaches and real people to post on social media. But again, that's actually me having an excuse for why I should probably spend more time on that.
Yeah, but exactly, your thing about like having a little bit of skin in the game is so important. You see this with coaches, and you see this with clients that want to get in shape as well, where I'm not saying a client shouldn't question me and ask questions and want to learn more, but there is an element of committing to a process, and you learn whether it's right or wrong by doing it. I've had so many coaches in my life. I've gone through so many diet approaches. I have tried nearly every diet on the planet at least once, and I'm successful with pretty much all of them because they all put me in a deficit. Some I enjoy, some I don't. But I've gone through them long enough to kind of go, right, I like this from this and this from this, and I don't like this from this. And if I'd never committed, if I go, well, there's a problem with this, or I don't like this, or yeah, but realistically, that study says this won't work, I would never have learned anything because I would never have actually seen firsthand how these things work.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you make there, actually, that I hadn't quite think about it, but evidence-based these days and changing of studies and all these things really might stop people from trying things. And the flip of that and to contribute to that is just because something isn't optimal doesn't mean it doesn't work. You know, all of these studies are testing what's the optimal ratio of A, B, C, and D. But all of this works. The optimist might be like 3%, 2% nuance. Like you still got to do the work, right? Oh, was 4 sets or 5 sets or 3 sets the best for me? Well, go do it and find out. If stop at 3, you're still going to be 60% there, even if you were wrong.
And most of these things come in ranges, right? Like when we look at like the most optimal way of doing things, I've learned that 80% of the stuff I learn is irrelevant because 20% of what I learn is the stuff that actually works. And these things are just nuance. These are just stuff to know. These are stuff to look out for if something goes wrong. And this is where, like, a lot of times it's like, is it 3 sets, 4 sets, 5 sets the best? They all could work. And I know some people that have, 12 to 14 sets on chest and they completely max out of what they can recover from. Some people on 20 to 25 sets per chest. Oh, and I started working on, like, I'm sure other people do this, but, with Gen Pop looking to build muscle, I now, what I call, I don't want to call it step learning because that's different. That's a rep scheme. But, like, I will increase sets per week over a course of a block with those people now. And the reason it's counterintuitive to what most people think. It's not to gradually increase volume over a block, get to their MAV. It's because if I trained, I'll use James Campion as an example, right? Bodybuilder, great mind-muscle connection, can train really hard, can get a lot out of 6 reps. He won't need many sets to grow. Yeah. But if I get that client, I had that all the time, that client only half listens to you, bounces, they're thinking about their next meeting, they're thinking about what they've just left from work, they've had a bad night's sleep, they've traveled. It's going to be a bit bouncy. I'm like, well, to get that same level of volume, I don't trust adding 5 kilos onto the bar because I don't trust you're going to control it well enough, especially when you're tired. So I just keep that same weight and do more of them. You may get to what is slightly the higher end of volume, but for you, it's what you need to get enough of a stimulus to keep a progression. Now, a study wouldn't show that because they're going to show people that are going to go, hey, we're doing a training study of effects of creatine monohydrate and sets on bench press performance. And you're going to get people like me and you go, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah. You're not going to get like Office Steve, who hates training, is going to think, oh, man, I'd love to do that study. So you don't see that stuff.
I completely agree. And it makes a good point that if you can't express intensity or effective reps, then the only lever that you can pull is volume, or frequency, so it's like, if you can't pull that intensity lever, then you're completely right. And I find this with clients in the beginning and especially some of my female clients when I was training people was you can push that volume lever because they're not strong enough for them to smash their nervous system or their body yet. And again, like you said, we're not going to find that in like the nuances of training general population clients only come from being in the trenches. You're not going to realize, you might be doing more sets in the beginning than you are later on in the training program. That doesn't make any sense. Well, it does when you realize that people can't express intensity for the first 6 to 12 weeks, So, you're right.
That's why I have a love-hate relationship with reps and reserve. Like, I love the work of Michael Self. I think it's fantastic, but it's relevant to the people he trains, which are bodybuilders to intermediate to advanced trainees. And I see people go, you should leave 1 to 2 reps in the tank. What your client thinks is 1 to 2 reps in the tank is probably 36 reps in the tank.
Yes. So, and even myself, I was following some training to failure protocol, so low volume, like trying myself, and it's like, okay, I think, like it was like the way I described everyone was 1 jab and 1 cross set. So one set to kind of see where I think I was going to be at, and then 1 set to all out failure. Yeah. And this one time I was like, okay, I'm setting the pin. I'm on about 72 on the seated row. I'm going to do probably 12 to 15 reps. I did 22. And I was like, I'm even cheating myself. Like, I'm cutting myself massively short. I've been training for 10 years. My clients have no idea what discomfort versus actual muscular failure is. They're completely different hemispheres.
And one of the things I always teach people, I like challenge sets in the early stage. Like, right, go to what you think is 1 rep in reserve for the first 2 sets. Set 3, go as many as you can. Yeah. And maybe they can't handle that level of failure, but in early stage, you can't recover because the diet shit and the sleep shit. But I'll tell you what, over time, we're going to bring that gap between their perceived 1 rep in reserve and their actual. Because if it's an extra 6, I increase the weight next to it. And eventually, that reps in reserve is going to be useful eventually when we start to actually just pull them back a little bit and actually find out where their limits are. And it teaches them hard work, which, as you said earlier on, a lot of people don't know how to do that anymore. We're in a comfort world where we can get Deliveroo at any time. We can get taxis everywhere we want. We don't ever push hard in any other real endeavor in life anymore.
No, 2 brilliant points you made there. One was teaches them how to work hard, right? Which, if you've never played, and this is no offense to anyone, if you've never played sports as a kid or through your adulthood and you start personal training, you don't know what it's like to push yourself. And that's unfortunate. You can learn. I agree with you. And the best way to learn is doing drop sets or reps to failure or back, supersets and these things. And one thing back to talk, we're not shitting on evidence-based this whole conversation, but when it comes to training, there's science versus art and physiological versus psychological adaptation. And there might be things that give you a psychological benefit, like training past what you can recover from, or training really hard, training to failure, smashing yourself with prowler suicide sets, because that makes your brain feel good. And if your brain feels good, you're more likely to come back to training on a more regular basis or close the habit dopamine loop off. And that's going to build you into a long-term routine, which is going to be more valuable than, oh, this is optimal, but it's boring. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I trained specific RTS perfected angles for 2 years. It was the most boring training I did. I got gains. I did some photo shoots. Great. Wonderful. I love learning the process. I love learning lever arms, moment arms, all of these things. And I still apply that to a lot of my training. But now I apply that to weighted, now I apply that to traditional golden era lifting more than trying to set the cable stack up to get the perfect converging angle. So there's a drop off in the last 30 degrees of my kind of humeral function, So, doesn't matter. Set the pin anywhere. As long as it's in this kind of region and as long as the bench is in this kind of way from the bench and press. Can you feel it? Great. Awesome. You know what I mean? So
that's such a good point. I remember I went recently, I did a 5-hour mentorship with Tom Hibbert, and I just wanted to talk about a little bit about strength because that's his wheelhouse. But I thought, what do you do for hypertrophy? You want to put some muscle on your strength, guys? How does it happen? And he was like, there is less rhyme and reason. With strength, it's very calculated. These hypertrophy's what do they enjoy? What are they going to train hard? And I'll do that. And I'm like, wow, how much do we all, and I still will, but how much do we all overthink this as coaches? Where when it comes to training, proximity to failure is important. So what is the system that's going to allow someone to train close to failure enough to get a response? If that's 6-12-25, then that is 6-12-25. If that's a bro split, then that's a bro split. And you said about the mechanics stuff, there's no one enjoys an exercise where it takes you 40 minutes to set up a band that looks more like a sex swing than a bench press. It's just too much. I've done this. I've scrapped leg press for my routine because I don't want to put the plates on there. So I'm certainly not going to set up the perfect reverse band setup. It's I just want to go on a lift. I'd rather find 2 exercises than to do that job rather than take 20 minutes of setup time on everything.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And yeah, how about just pick up, okay, you've got incline curl and preacher curl. So you got the short position and the long position. You can do those back to back in 3 sets in half the time it takes you to set up the perfect mid-range exercise. You know, so yeah.
When it comes to education, obviously, you're how long have you been doing the education of trainers now?
Good question. I want to say about 6 years, 6 or 7 years ish. At the first 3 or 4 was first 3 years was about part-time. I've been full-time, day in, day out, 100% committed to education for a good 4 years now.
So a similar time to me, and like me, the majority of that time has been in private, hidden in the shadows, right, watching what's going on. But you saying I was working for UP, you've been with ATP and other companies of this, seeing where the industry's going and seeing what it is from you being with coaches in person, hands-on, working with them directly. What do you think of the current landscape of education for coaches? What do you think is really good, and what do you think is missing from your opinion?
It's a very good question, actually. So I would, from the average, I can just, from my experience, from the average person coming in now, like based on hiring criteria and certain things, but the two things that have been apparent to me were, well, I say 3 things. We're just going to, I'm going to write a whole list of things now. So, but understanding what a coach's perspective and a client's perspective is. So I'll give you an example of nutrition, whereas me and you, if we're talking about nutrition, we're like macros, timing, bioavailability profile, insulin response, glycemic, like all of these things, right? Coach's perspective. A client's perspective on nutrition is, what do I eat? When do I eat? And how much do I eat it? Yeah. And if my client can't answer any of those, but can answer any of these, you're doing your job wrong. Yeah. So this is a point where we're talking about understanding what a client values. We value, was the pin on 7 or 8? Was the bench 2 meters away, 1 meter away? Was this angle? We value the nuances of training, where they value, did I train hard today? Was I greeted when I came in? Like, did I
train at all?
Yeah, did I train at all? Do I understand the process? So understanding what the client values, like putting your mindset in the idea of being a client is one of the things missing from, I think, personal trainers. I mean, it's very much granted as you get an experienced personal trainer. I'm just talking about like entry level at the moment. So understanding how to be a professional, I think, is something that's a little bit lost, because people who routinely come to be personal trainers do so because they like being in the gym. And being in the gym doesn't mean I have to be in an office. And because I'm not wearing a suit, I don't have to be professional. No, being a professional is more about how you do the job, not the job that you do. And then on top of that, then I think that I used to with the introduction of all of the, so easy to get all these substances now, and everyone doing a bikini show or everyone doing a bodybuilding show. Like, training is being great, but it's always been now like, let's do a heavy lift, max out on volume, and then take some vitamin S and a load of food, and we're going to get into great shape. Wonderful, like that's awesome, but that's not what's going to happen for your client. So really understanding like the old program design, like being a geek on actually that sort of stuff. So I know N1's popular now, RTS is popular now, Menno Henselman's got a brilliant course on coaching and all these sorts of things. I've done it. And Mark Coles has branched out into how to be an online coach. Phil Graham has done the same thing. And then there's all of these things, but there's not like what to do with your client inside this session and how to make that a wonderful experience for them. So, do you text them in between the sessions? What do you talk to them about? Like, how are they feeling? And then engage them in the process. Like, we're going to do this exercise, and then we're going to progress to this exercise, and I think that everything that was missing is now getting good, and that everything that was original, the personal training that people kind of shit on a little bit, which was going to the gym, training really hard with a coach, and then leaving, is kind of not getting done properly. So it's kind of majoring in the minors.
Do you think the push to online training has exacerbated this issue, especially when it comes to professionalism? Because when your job and your only interaction with people is sitting on a Loom video where people see you from the neck down, you could sit in your pants all day and no one would even know that you don't know what it's like to be a professional work environment, because most trainers now don't even want to be on the gym floor at all. They rush straight to the laptop lifestyle.
Yes, and that's the thing, like before, like I wrote a post about this a long time ago. Before you try and charge $100 online, try and charge $100, build that up in person. Because it's, I mean, maybe that's not a perfect example, but you should, like people can make it online. You can. There's wonderful people online who have got a product. The guy that owns the PTDC or whatever, Personal Training Development Center, John Goodman, he's never had an online client. He came out and admitted it. He's like, I've taught everyone how to be an online personal coach, and I've never actually done it, So wow. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm not, I'm sure there's someone that's never played basketball that could be a pro. They just have the skill set to do it. But for all of us, you need to get skin in the game. You need to understand the product. You need to be in the gym. You need to do these things. I have no idea how many personal training sessions I've done. I stopped counting at 8,000.
I didn't even get anywhere near 8,000. I stopped counting way before that. Like there was days where it was sort of like I was a junior in a gym where I was the only junior at the time. It was early stages of this sort of internship thing, and the 5 or 6 trainers were on holiday, and you weren't paid for cover at the time. So I was like, Simon will do them, and I remember doing 16 sessions in a day on Friday, Saturday, and Monday.
Yeah, wow, everyone's got to go through that rite of passage, man. Like that's tough.
It's brutal, right? But I wouldn't want to do that again. But I do think it's super important because you know where your limits are, you know how hard to push, and you know how to keep energy when things are hard. You know how to be. I always talk about with the online in-person thing. There's an eye to watching somebody train, and if you get a training video, you go, well, it looks right on paper, but actually it's not that good. But you 100% right. Professionalism is something that you learn by doing. It's hard to learn professionalism. It's hard to learn professionalism when you're not doing it in person.
Yes, yeah, and it teaches you to be organized. I mean, you had to the day before, work out the game plan of getting through 16 clients and what their programs were, and all of these sorts of things. And I'm not saying I've with the best intentions, it's impossible to maintain quality control standards over 16 hours in a row, but a damn straight, you'd have given it a very good job compared to coaches now that do 16 hours a month.
Yes. And it's taught me, whenever I have personal issues, when I'm tired, when anything's going wrong in my life, I can show up for that hour in the same way that online check-in is pretty easy. You know, you get that level of professionalism. Just a couple of closing questions before I let you get on, because I know how busy you are. Just on this one, when it comes to personal training, what are the top 2 qualities? And I think you've probably already touched on them, that you think a personal trainer needs to be successful in today's world.
Just taking a pause for answering that question. I feel like, me and you have just been like 2 grumpy old personal trainers on this call for the last. We're like, me and you are actually really quite jovial in person, but I think we've been on a couple of emotive topics today. So everyone's like, I'm not going to listen to that guy, man. He's so grumpy about the world. But there you go. So personal trainers. It depends if you're talking to the businessman or you're talking to trying what's gonna succeed in the industry. So if you want to look for a trainer that's going to succeed in the industry, it's very, very cliche that you go, they love training and they've got an open mind, and it's like, okay, but that doesn't help me because it's hard. But it really does. You digging a little bit deeper in that is when you talk to someone, training their thing. Is that what they do? It doesn't have to necessarily be crushing weights, although it does help if you're looking for a resistance training based personal trainer. But are they just, is this their home? Is this their environment? Like, is this where they want to be? And did they come from another career just to do this? That's a big green flag for me. So it's like, this person really wants this. And then the open mind is just, it's hard to tell initially, but you can tell by the people that I've had a few people that I've promoted at ATP, and it's because they booked in hours and hours with me every week, a few hours a week, just to learn and ask me questions. Like, hey, I need more information on this. Can you help me with this? Okay, I'll just sit with you and you can teach me whatever you want to teach for an hour, and I'm going to make notes. So it's how willing they are to invest in bettering themselves. And from an employer perspective, anyone listening to this, then these are questions that you can address in the interview. But for a client walking in off the gym floor, it's going to be very difficult because you're not going to know some of these. You're not going to know some of these things. So from a client walking from the gym perspective, you have to see, it comes down to then professionalism, personalism, and are they in shape? Are they well dressed? Do they look like they've just woken up? Are they running in late? And all of these professional skills that are very, very, very important and very, very missing. And how a person conducts himself, I think, is a big tell on whether they're going to make it as a personal trainer or not.
You can see the open mind with a client as well, right? Where if someone's got energy, I see a personal trainer where they look like they're just here to clock that hour, and the person sort of enjoys having this conversation. And the open mind thing about working with coaches is such like the attitude really is everything. And those people who block time with you probably going to do that same level of commitment with their clients. And when they expect their clients, because they will expect their clients to commit time outside that session, do the training and the steps and the nutrition and the recovery. But if they don't do it themselves, then they're kind of a hypocrite. And it doesn't have to mean they have to be on their diet all the time, but it does mean it's like, do they take their career as personally as the client should take their results? And if you don't, then there's a red flag there that's going to blow up eventually.
Yes, that's a good way. That's a good way to frame it, man. How much time are you willing to give to this? That's a good way.
So for anyone that wants to start a carnivore diet, how do people start? And should they be worried about getting the shits in the first week?
It's the second, but...
Oh, okay.
So I actually have a friend that's starting, and it depends on your psychology. So I am an all or nothing, black or white person when it comes to doing things like I am on or I'm off. Yeah, I'm trying to work on moderation as I go older, but then I realize some of your personality traits, you don't change that easy, so you may as well work with them. So for a carnivore diet, for all the people I've advised, I've said, okay, talk to me straight. Like, is this something that, like, do you want to go into, or do you want me to write you a couple of guidelines that you can tease out? Because it's not 100% is everything, and then 99% isn't everything. It's definitely a grayscale, and everyone's going to have their optimum along 0 to 100. So my straight up advice that I gave to someone who wants to go all in was, okay, what we're going to do is you choose 14 or 30 days, up to you. I think 30 days is a nice amount of time. You're going to, for 30 days, only commit to these foods. Yeah. So if you're going super strict, it's going to be beef and salt. If not, you can go any meat you want and salt. Some people who are still super active, beef, salt, and honey, for example. Whatever.
Do you recommend organs as well?
Yeah, I eat liver, but it's an acquired taste. It's not like I think there's a lot of benefits to eating liver. Liver is king. But it's like, if you don't eat liver, are you still going to experience benefits? Yeah, I went a year without eating liver the first time, and I experienced benefits. When I did eat it, like my brain exploded. Like I was like addicted to it. Like I was like, but I think once I got the nutrients out of it, I haven't been as addicted to it. So I would say, right, 30 days, go from there, and then see how you feel, and really take a good look at yourself and go, what do I want from this? What was the resultant of this? So then add in another food if you want to, or don't. But completely up to you. We'll cross that bridge after you've done your 2 or your 30 days, and you can see how your body responds to things. You know, you can add in sweet potatoes, you can add in your avocados if you want to, you can add in pizzas if you really wanted to. Like I don't care. You need to have a period of consistency before we make any of the changes. So doing meat and salt for 30 days is a challenge in itself, but it's also very powerful.
I really like that guideline, because I think that short level of commitment is something that people can see an end to. They don't feel like they want an endless diet. Another reason why the low carb bootcamp works, it showed you who was truly committed to the health, because it is a challenge. And so many people that preach, that's the reason why I want to get you on. There's so many people that talk about the carnivore diet, because if you ever have a bag of crisps or a sweet potato, you failed it. And like, that tiny thing doesn't outweigh all this work that you could be doing from improving your nutrient quality and nutrient density in your food. So I really, really like that approach. So for everybody who wants to know more about you, tell us a little bit about, like, one, where to find you, and what's the plan for the future with your education platform at ATP?
So you can find me, I'm very much understated now. You can find me on my Instagram. I think it's jhorley or j.horley. I think it's jhorley, Jayhorley. I'm on Instagram, but Instagram for me at the moment is jiu-jitsu and beef and training, you know? So that's basically, it's kind of like, Instagram for me is like Dear Diary. So for my education system, people haven't seen it. I've been building on it. Obviously, it's in-house to ADP. I've been building it every single day of my life for 3.5 years. It's to the point now where you come in and we give you full-time education for 3 to 4 months before you start work. You know, it's a combination of nearly like 250 lectures, 250 net things. It's like 2 hours, 3 hours of lecturing a day for 12 weeks or whatever it is. And the goal of that really is to raise the standards of personal trainings, because, you know, I know you're an educator, you guys do a great job. I believe in what we're doing, but fundamentally, there's so many people out there that spend money because they're desperate for a change, and personal training is like a hope for them that they can get what they want, and there's just the help is not there, you know, or it's too rigid, or it's, hey, you've just got to push the prowler and do leg press and eat chicken and broccoli for 12 weeks, and that's what we wanted to change. We wanted to raise the game of personal training. So for me, the goal is always just keep building this, building ATP, building more ATPs. And my personal goal is to get 100 personal trainers to a full-time career where they can support themselves and their families. And then we'll see after that. But until I've hit that milestone, it's Instagram is going to be jiu-jitsu, beef, and UFC and all these things that I love, and some conspiracy posts and all of these sort of things that we'll do in a part 2.
I was just about to say, we didn't even touch on the conspiracies. We'll do an episode that will get cancelled, and as a part 2 for sure.
We'll do a cancelled episode. And yeah, onwards and upwards, man. Like I love that you're reaching out to all these fitness industry professionals and just giving people a voice that they can listen to, and finding people. And this is the great side of the internet, you know, where people can just connect and share and be wonderful. And then we have the dark side of the internet, which means I just lost 4 hours of my life scrolling.
Yes, exactly. For every person, and we said this before we came on air, we touched on it in the episode. For every person that is a zealot, woke, on either side of the spectrum, I have connected with more people through this pandemic where we had lived on Zoom. There are friends that I hadn't spoken to for 5-6 years, but now they're as easy to contact as the person next door because everyone's on Zoom. So yes. I can contact those people. I've reconnected with old friends. I've met new friends through this podcast. Like, the internet is great if you use it for what it's meant to be for. Yeah, which is what life is for, which is for human connection and human experience. And we forget that, you know, so yeah, just to round it off. Yeah, that's a positive message in the episode on mine, but thank you very much, mate. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you for your time. Take care.